Welcome, dear listeners. I'm here with a story that will take away all the fatigue of the day. If you're subscribed, the story begins. Chapter 1. The Cold Breath of the Thames. The last week of November had enveloped London in its familiar grey blanket. The flickering lights of the street lamps twinkled like stars in the early evening darkness. The Thames River flowed slowly through the heart of the city, as if carrying all the secrets of centuries. The wind blew across the river, rattling the windows of the buildings along the shore, reminding those inside of the cold outside. In the sitting room of 221B Baker Street, two men sitting in front of the fireplace were oblivious to this gloomy evening. Sherlock Holmes was reclining in his usual chair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in thought. His fingers occasionally moved in the air, drawing notes as if playing an invisible violin. Dr. John Watson, meanwhile, sat in the opposite armchair, trying to read the newspaper in his hand. But his friend's strange silence was unsettling him. "Holmes," Watson finally said, setting the newspaper on his lap, "you haven't said a word in 3 days. Mrs. Hudson has taken the breakfast tray back 3 times. What's the matter this time?" Holmes replied without blinking. "Boredom, Watson. Pure, unadulterated boredom. London's criminals seem to have gone into hibernation. Not a single interesting case. The newspapers write about nothing but gossip and politics." Watson smiled slightly. He knew his friend well. Sherlock Holmes was a man who became restless when his mind was not occupied, who withdrew into himself when he couldn't channel his energy somewhere. But Watson also knew that this silence never lasted long. London was not very good at keeping its secrets. Just then, hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. Mrs. Hudson's voice rose from behind the door. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector Lestrade has sent an urgent message. A gentleman has died at the club on the banks of the Thames." Holmes sprang up as if from a spring. The dullness in his eyes instantly gave way to a sharp gleam. When he opened the door, he almost snatched the envelope from Mrs. Hudson's hand. Even as he opened the envelope, he was reaching for his coat. "Watson, take your coat. We finally have something worthwhile." Watson was not surprised by his friend's sudden burst of energy. He put the newspaper aside and stood up. "Where are we going?" "The East Wind Club," said Holmes, frowning as he read the note. "On the banks of the Thames, quite a distinguished place, and apparently a doctor died there tonight. Dr. Nathan Crowe. Lestrade says no suspicious circumstances, but he's still calling me. That alone is interesting, isn't it, Watson?" Watson thought as he put on his coat. Lestrade was one of Scotland Yard's most experienced detectives. If there was no suspicious circumstance, why would he call Holmes? The question sparked in his mind. Within minutes, the pair stepped out into the cold air of Baker Street. Holmes hailed a horse-drawn carriage with his sharp gaze and gave the driver the address. As the carriage made its way through London's crowded streets toward the Thames, Holmes looked out the window, watching the streets with a thoughtful expression. "What do you know about the East Wind Club, Watson?" Watson searched his memory. "It's quite a prestigious place. Businessmen, doctors, lawyers, even some politicians are members. It's difficult to get membership. You need serious references. I've been there a few times, at a friend's invitation." Holmes nodded. "Yes, just as I thought. A place where respectable people gather, where everyone knows each other. For someone to die in such a place, interesting." After about a 20-minute drive, the car stopped in front of a magnificent building on the banks of the Thames. The East Wind Club was a 3-story brick-fronted building with large windows. Several police officers were waiting in front of the door. Dim light seeped out from inside, and the street lamps in front of the building illuminated the wet pavement. Holmes sniffed the air as soon as he stepped out of the car. He raised his eyebrows. "The rain has stopped," he said to himself, "but it was raining about an hour ago. The pavements are still wet." Watson noted this observation, but did not yet understand its significance. He was accustomed to Holmes paying attention to such details. Their importance usually became apparent later. A young police officer waiting at the door let them in. The club's entrance was more impressive than Watson remembered. Dark oak panelling, crystal chandeliers, thick velvet curtains. But this evening, a heavy silence hung over the grand atmosphere. A few people in the lobby whispered anxiously. Inspector Lestrade was waiting at the door to the main hall. The middle-aged man with a thin moustache, looking tired as usual, relaxed when he saw Holmes. "Holmes, it's good you're here. Actually, there doesn't seem to be anything suspicious here, but something is bothering me." Holmes scanned the area as he walked toward Lestrade. His eyes scanned everything from the people's shoes in the lobby to the drinks in their hands, their posture, and their facial expressions. "Tell me, Lestrade, what happened?" Lestrade led them into the lounge. Dr. Nathan Crowe, 52 years old, one of the chief surgeons at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. He arrived at the club around 7 o'clock this evening. He sat in his usual corner and had a glass of brandy. Around 8 o'clock, one of the waiters noticed the doctor was unresponsive. When he went over, he found him dead. The lounge was a spacious and airy room. Leather armchairs, oak tables, oil paintings on the walls. The fire was still burning in the fireplace, casting a warm light over the room. But this warmth could not change the cold reality in one corner of the room. Dr. Nathan Crowe was sitting in a leather armchair near the window. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly to one side. If no one had said anything, he could have been mistaken for sleeping. On the small table next to him was a half-empty brandy glass and a few papers. Holmes approached the body. He bent down and began to examine it carefully. Watson, with his professional instincts, immediately stepped in. "May I examine it?" Lestrade nodded. "Of course, doctor. The police doctor has already looked at it." "Sudden heart attack," he said. "No signs of beating, no signs of poisoning, no signs of a struggle. Looks like a completely natural death." Watson checked the body's pulse points, examined its eyes, looked at the colour of its skin. A few minutes later, he stood up. "It seems the police doctor was right. There are signs of sudden cardiac arrest. But Holmes, something caught my attention. The doctor must have had a chronic heart condition. The slight blue tint to his lips, the discoloration of his fingernails. These are signs of a long-term heart patient." Holmes looked at Watson. There was a sparkle in his eyes. "Excellent observation, Watson. Continue." Watson shrugged. "A man with heart disease had a stressful day, could have had a heart attack. Medically, I see nothing suspicious." Holmes said nothing. Instead, he began to circle the body slowly. He bent down and looked at the doctor's shoes. Then he examined his pockets. He pulled a piece of paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Lestrade, what's this?" Lestrade approached. "A train ticket to Bristol for tomorrow morning." Holmes held the ticket up to the light. He was going to Bristol tomorrow morning, but tonight he was here at a club on the banks of the Thames. Interesting. Watson tried to understand. Perhaps he had an early meeting tomorrow and wanted to spend the evening here. Holmes shook his head. No, Watson. This ticket was purchased today, at 4 o'clock. So the doctor decided to go to Bristol this afternoon, but then he changed his plans and came here. Why? Lestrade frowned. Maybe something came up. Plans change. Holmes looked at the doctor's shoes again. Watson, take a look at those shoes. Watson bent down. The shiny black leather shoes looked well maintained and expensive. Nice shoes. What about them? Dry, said Holmes. Completely dry. Watson thought for a moment, then he looked at Holmes with a blank expression. So? Holmes walked to the window. He parted the curtain and looked outside. It was raining an hour ago, Watson. The pavement is still wet. There's no taxi rank in front of this club. The nearest one is 2 streets away. How did the doctor get here and keep his shoes dry? Lestrade tried to follow Holmes's reasoning. Maybe he came in a private car, right up to the door. Club rules, said Holmes, prohibit private cars from pulling up to the door. You know that, Lestrade. The club wants its members to walk like ordinary people, a kind of tradition. Watson was beginning to understand what his friend meant. So, the doctor either arrived before the rain, which is impossible because according to the club records he entered at 7 o'clock, Holmes finished. Or someone drove him right up to the door, said Lestrade, his eyes widening. Breaking the rules. Holmes smiled slightly. Now it's getting interesting, isn't it? Watson turned back to the body. But that doesn't prove it was murder, Holmes. Maybe a friend drove him. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. Holmes reached for the papers on the table. A few were club menus. One was a notepad. He picked up the note and examined it. Look at this. On the notepad, in shaky handwriting, was an unfinished sentence. MV, final payment. The sentence ended there. The pen had stopped, leaving a line drawn down the middle of the word. It was as if the writer had suddenly stopped, or been stopped. MV, said Holmes thoughtfully. It could be the initials of a name, or an abbreviation. Lestrade scribbled something in his notebook. We'll check the membership list. Who has the initials MV? Holmes put the note in his pocket. Then he scanned the room. How many people were here at the time of the incident? 32 members, said Lestrade, plus staff, about 45 people in total. And none of them saw anything suspicious? No, everyone was busy with their own business. The doctor was sitting in his usual corner. No one went over to him, except one person. Holmes's eyes lit up. Who? The club's treasurer, Marcus Vance. He offered the doctor a glass. They had a brief chat. But Vance says in his statement that the doctor looked perfectly fine. Marcus Vance, Holmes said slowly. MV. Watson recognized the expression on his friend's face. That sharp hunter's gaze. He had found a clue. Lestrade, where is this Vance now? Upstairs in one of the private rooms, with the other witnesses. We're holding them all, taking statements. Holmes headed for the stairs. Then he stopped, turned. Watson, stay here, examine the body once more, especially the pockets, everything. Lestrade, bring me the club's entry records, the entire last week. Watson nodded. He didn't know exactly what Holmes was looking for, but he trusted his friend. They had worked together for years, and Holmes's instincts were rarely wrong. As Holmes climbed the stairs, Watson turned back to the body. Outside, the Thames flowed silently through the dark waters. The wind rattled the windows softly. In this club, this ostentatious and respectable place, a man had died. a seemingly natural death. But Watson knew Holmes had seen something. Those sharp eyes caught details that ordinary people missed. And if Holmes was right, a murderer was lurking within the club's ornate walls. Watson carefully opened the doctor's coat. In the inside pocket there was something else besides the ticket. A small glass bottle. It said Digitalis on it. Heart medicine. Watson held the bottle up to the light. There were a few pills inside. They looked normal. But something caught his attention. The bottle's cap wasn't completely closed. It looked like it had been closed in a hurry. He had to tell Holmes. From upstairs, Holmes's sharp voice could be heard. He was talking to someone. His tone was calm but determined. Watson realized his friend had begun questioning them. The Thames continued to flow silently outside. Tonight, it would carry more secrets. And Sherlock Holmes, as always, was on the trail of those secrets. The fireplace crackled. The body of Dr. Nathan Crowe lay motionless on the leather armchair. London's cold November night seeped in through the windows. The murder had not yet been proven. But for Holmes, it was only a matter of time. The truth always came to the surface. Chapter 2. Dry Shoes and the Wrong Ticket. The upper floor of the East Wind Club had a different atmosphere from the ornate salons below. Narrower corridors, lower ceilings, and less lighting. This was the section where the club's private rooms were located. Members used these rooms for business meetings or confidential conversations. Tonight, however, these rooms housed the witnesses to a death. Sherlock Holmes paused briefly in front of each door as he walked down the corridor. He listened intently, straining to hear any sounds from inside, then continued on. He stopped in front of the third door. A low conversation was coming from inside. A man's voice, calm but tense. He knocked on the door. "Come in," came the reply from inside. The room was a small study. An oak desk, a few leather chairs, a framed copy of the club's founding document on the wall. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged man. Neatly combed brown hair, a clean-shaven face, a well-tailored grey suit. His eyes flashed, for a moment when he saw Holmes, then settled into a calm expression. "Mr. Holmes, I presume," said the man, rising. "Marcus Vance. I'm the club's treasurer. Inspector Lestrade mentioned you were coming." Holmes shook the man's hand. During the handshake, he noticed that Vance's palm was slightly damp. A sign of nervousness, but that could also be a normal reaction to the death of a friend. "Mr. Vance, I have a few questions. Do you mind if I sit down?" Vance pointed to the chair opposite him. "Of course, please. This is a terrible night. Dr. Crowe was one of the most respectable people I knew." Holmes sat down, crossing his legs. His eyes studied Vance's face. The man was trying to appear calm, but the slight twitch at the corner of his eyes and the occasional tightening of his lips betrayed his inner turmoil. How long had you known Dr. Crowe? Vance thought. About 5 years. We met when I joined the club. He was already a long-standing member and explained the club's traditions to me. We would chat from time to time. Were you close friends? No, not really. More like work colleagues. We would discuss club matters and occasionally talk about investments. Dr. Crowe had a very sharp mind when it came to financial matters. Holmes nodded. It's been said that you offered Dr. Crowe a drink this evening. Is that correct? Vance's eyes darted away for a moment, then returned to Holmes. Yes, that's correct. I saw him when he entered the club. He looked a little tired. I offered him a brandy, which he accepted. We chatted for a few minutes, then I went back to my own business. What did you talk about? Trivial things, the weather, the club's new furniture, next week's annual meeting. Really just ordinary conversation. Holmes took the train ticket out of his pocket. He placed it on the table. "Do you recognize this ticket?" Vance looked at the ticket. He frowned. "No. What is it?" "We found it in Dr. Crow's pocket. A ticket to Bristol for tomorrow morning. Purchased this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Vance shrugged. "He might have business in Bristol. I didn't know." "Here's the interesting part, Mr. Vance. Dr. Crow was planning to go to Bristol today, but he changed his plans and came here instead. Why would he do that?" A fleeting look of uncertainty crossed Vance's face. It vanished quickly, but Holmes had caught it. "I don't know. Maybe something came up. An emergency patient, a meeting. Doctors' schedules are always changing." Holmes stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the dark waters of the Thames were visible. The street lamps cast flickering reflections on the wet pavement. "Mr. Vance, did it rain this evening?" Vance was taken aback by the unexpectedness of the question. "Yes, it started around 6 o'clock. It lasted about an hour. Dr. Crow entered the club at 7 o'clock, so in the middle of the rain." "I suppose so." Holmes turned and looked at Vance. "Then explain this to me. Why were the doctor's shoes completely dry?" Vance's face froze for a moment. Then he recovered. Maybe he had an umbrella, or he came by car. Club rules prohibit private cars from pulling up to the door. You know that, as treasurer, you should know the rules better than anyone. Vance swallowed. "Yes, I know. But sometimes there are exceptions. When the weather is bad, some members—" "Who brought him?" The question was sharp and direct. Vance hesitated for a moment. "I don't know. I was inside the club. I wasn't at the door." Holmes looked into Vance's eyes. The man didn't look away, but the tension on his face increased. "Mr. Vance, was there any disagreement between you and Dr. Crow?" "No, absolutely not. Like I said, we got along well." "Well, do the initials MV mean anything to you?" This question clearly unsettled Vance. The man held his breath for a moment, then forced a smile. "MV? Those are my initials. Marcus Vance, but why do you ask?" Holmes took a piece of paper from his pocket. "Dr. Crow tried to write something before he died. MV final payment. The sentence is incomplete." Vance's face paled. His lips trembled, but he quickly recovered. That must be a coincidence. MV could be something else. A company, an institution." "Perhaps," Holmes said calmly. "Perhaps not. That's all for now, Mr. Vance, but I request that you not leave London." Holmes walked to the door. Just as he was about to leave, he turned. One more thing. Did you know Dr. Crow had heart problems?" Vance nodded. "Yes, everyone knew. He'd been taking medication for years. Digitalis, I believe." "Did you ever see his medicine? The bottle?" Vance's eyes flicked away for a moment, very briefly, very quickly. But Holmes caught it. "No," said Vance. "Why would I?" Holmes left the room without saying anything. In the hallway, Lestrade was waiting. He had a stack of papers in his hand. "Entry records, Holmes. Last week." Holmes took the papers, skimmed them quickly. He stopped at one page, frowned. "Interesting. Dr. Crow came to the club every day for the last 2 weeks. Every day at the same time. Entered at 7, left at 9. But before that, he only came 2 or 3 times a month." Lestrade shrugged. "Maybe he was preparing to retire, wanted to spend more time here." "Or he was meeting someone regularly," said Holmes. "And today, when he should have gone to Bristol, He changed his plans and came here again. Why? Watson was coming up the stairs. He had a small glass bottle in his hand. "Holmes, I found this, in the doctor's inside pocket." Holmes took the bottle and examined it. Digitalis, heart medicine. Yes, but something caught my eye. The cap wasn't completely closed. And on the bottle, look here. Watson pointed to a spot on the bottle. There was a faint mark on the glass surface. Something like a fingerprint, but blurred, not perfectly clear. Holmes held the bottle up to the light. His eyes lit up. This fingerprint isn't the doctor's. Judging by the angle, the person holding the bottle used their right hand and their thumb is here. But Dr. Crow was left-handed. Lestrade was astonished. "How do you know that?" "Look at the unfinished note. The slant of the handwriting belongs to a left-handed person." And he carried a pen in his left coat pocket. Left-handed people put the pen in the left pocket for easier access. Watson shook his head in amazement. So someone touched the doctor's medicine bottle. More than that, Watson. This bottle was the key to the doctor's life. For a man with heart disease, this medicine was essential. If someone accessed this bottle... Holmes didn't finish his sentence. Shouts came from below. All three rushed to the stairs. A crowd had gathered in the main hall. In the middle, an old man was shouting, grey-haired, red-faced, angry. "This is outrageous. You can't keep us here. I'm Oliver Trent, president of this club. I'm calling my lawyers." Lestrade stepped forward. "Mr. Trent, calm down. This is an investigation." "An investigation? The man died of a heart attack. Everyone saw it. There was no murder." Holmes made his way through the crowd and approached Trent. "Mr. Trent, I am Sherlock Holmes. I have a few questions if you don't mind." Trent looked Holmes up and down. "Holmes? Detective Holmes? I know you from the newspapers, but there's no detective work to be done here." "Perhaps you're right," said Holmes calmly. "But there are a few inconsistencies. For example, how did Dr. Crow get here this evening?" Trent frowned. "What do you mean, how? On foot, I suppose, like everyone else." "It was raining, but the doctor's shoes are dry." Trent paused for a moment. Maybe he had an umbrella. "An umbrella doesn't protect shoes, Mr. Trent. Puddles, wet sidewalks. A person's shoes would definitely get wet if they walked here." A voice rose from the crowd. A young man dressed in a waiter's uniform. "I saw it. A car brought the doctor, right up to the door." Everyone turned to the young man. Holmes went straight over to him. "What's your name?" "Simon Hadley, sir. I'm a bartender here." "Tell us, Simon, what did you see?" Simon tensed under the crowd's gaze, but continued. "It was around 7 o'clock. The rain was pouring down. I looked out the window and saw a car. A black, closed car. It stopped right in front of the door. 2 people got out." "Who were they?" "One was Dr. Crow. I recognized him. The other... I'm not sure. It was dark, it was raining. But he was tall. He wore a hat." Holmes's eyes lit up. "Then what happened?" "Dr. Crow went inside. The other man... I think he got back in the car. Or he went in through the back door. I don't know." "Was there a mark, an emblem on the car?" Simon thought. "No, it was a plain car, like a rental car. But there was something... I saw a yellow mud stain on the car's wheel. Bright yellow, an unusual colour." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "That's important. Yellow mud in London is only found in certain areas, especially near the brick factories in the south." Watson interjected. "But Holmes, that explains how the doctor got here. Someone brought him, perhaps a friend. That doesn't prove murder." You're right, Watson. It doesn't prove it on its own. But consider, the doctor was planning to go to Bristol. He had bought a ticket for 4 o'clock, but then he changed his plans and came here. Someone brought him here by car, and that someone came right up to the door, breaking the rules. Holmes looked at everyone in the room. Dr. Crow didn't want to come here tonight. Someone brought him, and that someone might be in this room. The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers rose. Marcus Vance was coming down the stairs. He had heard Holmes's last words. His face was pale, but his expression was calm. "Mr. Holmes," said Vance, "that's a serious accusation. You can't accuse people without evidence." "I'm not accusing anyone, Mr. Vance. I'm just stating the facts. And the facts show that what happened tonight is not as simple as it seems." Holmes turned to Watson and Lestrade. "There's not much we can do tonight, but tomorrow we'll go to Dr. Crow's house, and we'll find out why he wanted to go to Bristol." Lestrade nodded. "Shall I release the witnesses?" "Yes, but get everyone's address, and Mr. Vance—" Holmes turned to the clerk. "As I said, don't leave London." Vance said nothing. He just nodded and disappeared into the crowd. As they left the club, Watson turned to his friend. "Holmes, you suspect Vance, don't you?" Holmes breathed in the cold night air. The Thames flowed silently in the darkness. "It's too early to suspect, Watson. But I can say this. Mr. Marcus Vance knows more than he's letting on. And Dr. Crow's unfinished note? MV final payment. That sentence could mean many things. Are you thinking blackmail?" Holmes smiled slightly. "It's too early to think, but to rule out possibilities, we need more information. Tomorrow, we'll delve into Dr. Crow's past, and I'm sure we'll find interesting things." They turned a horse-drawn carriage. As they returned to Baker Street, Holmes looked out the window. His eyes shone as if searching for something in the dark streets. Watson looked at his friend's thoughtful profile. They had been working together for years, and Watson knew Holmes well in this state. The detective's mind was calculating moves like a chess player. Every detail, every clue, was a piece of a great puzzle. "Holmes," said Watson, "if this really is a murder, how was it done? The autopsy shows natural causes, no poison, no signs of struggle." Holmes turned and looked at Watson. "That, Watson, is precisely what makes this case so interesting. If this is a murder, the killer is extremely clever. They managed to make the death appear natural, but every crime leaves a trace. Every murderer makes a mistake. And you will find that mistake." Holmes smiled slightly. "We will find it, Watson, as always." The car was moving through the dark streets of London. The night was deepening, but for Holmes, the night was just beginning. A wrong train ticket, dry shoes, an unfinished note, and a medicine bottle. Small pieces, clues to a larger picture. And Sherlock Holmes was determined to complete that picture. Chapter 3. The Unfinished Sentence. The next morning, fog had settled over London. Looking out of the window on Baker Street, the silhouettes of the buildings across the way were barely visible. The street lamps were still lit. The sun couldn't pierce the thick blanket. Sherlock Holmes sat at the breakfast table, examining the papers in front of him. He hadn't slept all night. Watson could tell from the slight shadows under his eyes. But the detective's mind seemed unaffected by fatigue. On the contrary, it was sharper, more focused than ever. "Watson," said Holmes without looking up, "what do you know about Dr. Crow? Professionally." Watson thought as he sipped his tea. "A respected surgeon. Worked at St. Bartholomew's for many years. Made a name for himself in heart surgery, ironically. published a few papers, well known in medical circles. Did he have any enemies? Every successful man has enemies, Holmes. But Crowe, he was a quiet man. He was known as someone who minded his own business and kept to himself. Holmes placed the paper on the table. These are the club's membership records. Dr. Crowe has been a member for 12 years. But here's the interesting part. Over the last 6 months, his attendance at the club has dramatically increased. Whereas he used to come 2 or 3 times a month, over the last 6 months he has been coming almost every day. Watson raised his eyebrows. Preparing for retirement? He has more free time now. Perhaps, or he was meeting someone here regularly. Holmes stood up and reached for his coat. Today we're going to Dr. Crowe's house. We need to talk to his wife. Half an hour later, the pair were standing on a respectable street in Kensington. Dr. Crowe's house was a 3-story, white-fronted, well-kept structure. The flowers in the garden were wilted, but it was clear a careful hand tended them. A black ribbon hung on the door, a sign of mourning. An elderly maid opened the door. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. "Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson," said Holmes. "We wish to speak with Mrs. Crowe regarding her husband's death." The maid let them in and directed them to a sitting room. The room was typical of a Victorian upper-middle-class home. Heavy furniture, velvet curtains, family portraits above the fireplace. But there was a coldness in the air, not just from the season. A few minutes later, Lydia Crowe entered. She was 48 years old, thin and pale. She looked even paler in her black morning dress. Her eyes were dry, but her expression was weary. "Mr. Holmes," said the woman, shaking his outstretched hand. "I was expecting you. Inspector Lestrade said you were coming." Holmes and Watson sat down. Lydia Crowe sat down in the chair opposite them. Her hands were in her lap, her fingers intertwined. "Mrs. Crowe, I'm sorry for your loss," said Holmes. "I apologize for disturbing you at this difficult time, but I need to ask you a few questions." The woman nodded. "I understand. What do you want to know?" "Had your husband been acting differently lately? Anxious, tense, or just different from usual?" Lydia Crowe thought for a moment. Her eyes drifted to the window. "Nathan was always a distant man, Mr. Holmes. Our marriage, it wasn't a warm one. We respected each other, but love had long since faded. Over the years, we started sleeping in separate rooms. We were living separate lives." Watson was surprised by the woman's frankness, but there was no surprise on Holmes's face, only attentive listening. "Still," the woman continued, "there was a change in the last few months. Nathan was more tense, more irritable. He would stay in his study late into the night. Sometimes I heard him talking quietly on the phone. I don't know who he was calling." "Did you notice that he started going to the club more often?" The woman nodded with a bitter smile. "Yes. He went almost every evening. I thought it was another woman, frankly. But it doesn't matter now." Holmes took the half-finished note out of his pocket. "We found this note with your husband. Do you recognize his handwriting?" Lydia Crowe took the note. Her eyes scanned the shaky letters. "Yes, this is Nathan's writing, but MV final payment? What does that mean?" "We're trying to find out. Do the initials MV mean anything to you? A name? A company?" The woman thought, shaking her head. "No. I don't know Nathan's work colleagues very well. I don't know his club friends at all." Holmes took the note back. "Does your husband have a study? May we look at it?" Lydia Crowe led them upstairs to her husband's study. The room was furnished with bookshelves a heavy oak desk and a leather armchair. On the desk were medical books, papers, and an inkwell. Holmes began opening the desk drawers. Watson was examining the bookshelves. "Mrs. Crowe," said Holmes, rummaging through one of the drawers. "What was your husband's financial situation? Did he have any debts?" The woman frowned. "Debts? No, not as far as I know. Nathan earned well. He was a thrifty man, never spent money unnecessarily." Holmes pulled a small notebook out of a drawer. It was a leather-bound, worn diary. "What is this?" Lydia Crowe shrugged. "It might be Nathan's personal diary. I never opened it." Holmes began flipping through the pages of the diary. His eyes scanned the pages quickly. He stopped at one point and frowned. "Interesting." Watson came over. "What did you find?" Holmes showed him a page of the diary. The page was filled with dates and numbers. On the 15th of every month, there was a regular entry. June 15th, $50 cash. July 15th, $50 cash. August 15th, $50 cash. September 15th, $70 of cash. October 15th, $70 of cash. November 15th, $100 cash. Watson looked at the numbers. Regular cash withdrawals, increasing amounts. Holmes shook his head. "And note, Watson, these are not withdrawals, but deposits. Dr. Crowe wasn't withdrawing this money. He was receiving it." Lydia Crowe looked at the diary. She looked shocked. "I don't understand. Where was Nathan getting the money? His salary went into the bank." "Mrs. Crowe, your husband was receiving money from someone, regularly, in increasing amounts. This looks like something." Watson understood what Holmes meant. Blackmail. The woman blinked. Blackmail? Nathan was blackmailing someone? That's impossible. He was a respected doctor. Holmes put the diary in his pocket. "Respectability, Mrs. Crowe, is not always an indication of character. People can wear different faces behind closed doors." There was a silence in the room. Lydia Crowe looked at her husband's desk. Something changed in her eyes, as if she were seeing the man she thought she had known for years for the first time. Holmes continued searching. In a drawer under the desk, he found a locked box. "Do you have the key to this?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know. Nathan usually keeps his keys in his coat." Holmes took a small toolkit out of his pocket. Within seconds, he had opened the box. Inside were a stack of papers. Old, yellowed papers. Holmes examined the papers. His eyes widened. "Watson, look at this." Watson looked at the papers. It was a hospital record from years ago. St. Bartholomew's Hospital letterhead. And on it was a name. Patient, Marcus Vance date. March 12th, 1881. Treatment, right hand, broken fingers, result of a fight. Notes, patient presented with a false identity. Real name, Martin Vickers. Police record, fraud, forgery. After reading the paper, Watson looked at Holmes. Marcus Vance's real name is Martin Vickers, and Dr. Crowe has known this for years. Holmes carefully folded the papers. Now everything is starting to fall into place. Dr. Crowe accidentally discovered Marcus Vance's real identity years ago. Vance built a new life with a false identity and became the treasurer of a respectable club, and Crowe used this information to blackmail him. Lydia Crowe listened, her face ashen. "Nathan, was he a blackmailer?" Holmes turned to the woman. His voice was soft but firm. "Mrs. Crowe, your husband appeared to be a respectable man, but these documents tell a different story. He had been taking money from Marcus Vance for months, and Vance finally decided to put an end to it." Watson interjected. "But Holmes, how was the murder committed? The autopsy shows natural causes." Holmes walked to the window. Outside, the fog was slowly lifting. To find out, we need to examine Dr. Crow's medications. Watson, is there a bottle of digitalis in the doctor's room? Watson headed for a small cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened the door. Inside were medical supplies, bandages, bottles. He took out a glass bottle. Here it is, digitalis. Holmes took the bottle. He examined it. Then he opened the lid and took out one of the pills. He brought the pill close to his nose and sniffed it. He frowned. Watson, have you smelled this medicine before? Watson took the pill and sniffed it. Digitalis leaves a faint scent, a herbal scent. But this is almost odorless. Holmes held the pill up to the light. The colour is slightly different too. Real digitalis pills are darker. His eyes lit up. These pills are fake, Watson. Someone replaced Dr. Crow's medicine with useless placebos. The doctor hadn't been taking the real medicine for weeks. Lydia Crow began to tremble. Does this mean murder? Holmes shook his head. Yes, Mrs. Crow. Your husband was murdered, but the killer used an extremely clever method. He replaced his medicine with fakes, waited for the doctor's heart to weaken, and finally, on a stressful day, triggered a heart attack. No one suspected because the doctor was already a heart patient. Watson marvelled at the complexity of this clever plan. How did the killer gain access to the doctor's medication? Holmes scanned the room thoughtfully. The answer to that question requires us to examine Dr. Crow's final weeks. Who he met with, where he went, who entered this house. He turned to Lydia Crow. Mrs. Crow, did you have any visitors at home in recent weeks? Your husband's friends? Colleagues? The woman racked her brain. A few patients came for appointments and, yes, someone from the club came. The treasurer, I think. It was a short visit. They talked in Nathan's room. Holmes and Watson looked at each other. Did Marcus Vance come to this house? Yes, I think that was his name. It was brief, maybe 10 minutes. Nathan saw him out at the door. I only saw him from a distance. Holmes felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Vance could have accessed the drugs during that visit. Perhaps he entered the room somehow while distracting Dr. Crow. Watson noticed something else. Holmes, look at the diary. When was the last entry? Holmes opened the diary. The last entry was dated November 15th. Today was November 23rd. A week ago, and the amount had risen to £100. The blackmail pressure was increasing. Watson put the pieces together. Vance couldn't stand the increasing pressure. He looked for a way out and found it, to quietly eliminate Dr. Crow. Holmes gathered the papers and the diary. Mrs. Crow, these documents are important evidence. I will hand them over to Scotland Yard. And my advice to you is not to stay in this house for a few days. Can you stay with a relative? The woman shook her head, looking bewildered and frightened. My sister lives in Hampstead. I can go to her. Holmes and Watson left the house. Outside, the fog had almost completely lifted. A pale sun cast a warm light on the streets. Holmes, said Watson as they walked. All this points to Vance, but we still have no definitive proof. Vance could deny changing the medicines. Holmes shook his head. You're right, Watson. Suspicion isn't enough. We need proof. And that proof may be in the medicine bottle. There was a fingerprint on the bottle in the doctor's pocket that didn't belong to Vance. If that fingerprint belongs to Vance, how will you compare it? Holmes smiled. There are many objects at the club that Vance has touched. Account books, pens, glasses. I'll ask Lestrade to get them. Watson was impressed by his friend's plan. And if the fingerprints match, then Mr. Marcus Vance, or Martin Vickers as he is really called, We'll face some very difficult questions." They hailed a horse-drawn carriage. Holmes gave the driver the address of Scotland Yard. As the carriage set off, Holmes looked out the window. London was waking up in the early hours of the morning. Street vendors were setting up their stalls. Workers were heading to the factories. A normal day for normal people. But for Holmes, this was a day spent tracking a killer. "Watson," said Holmes without taking his eyes off the street, "this case reminds me of something. The most dangerous murders are the ones that go unseen. Knife wounds, gunshots attract attention. But tampering with someone's medicine, that's a silent murder. The victim dies without even realizing they're dying." Watson felt the weight of this thought. Vance must have planned this months ago. A cold-blooded killer. "Or a desperate man," said Holmes. "A man crushed under the pressure of blackmail, facing the loss of everything. That doesn't excuse him, but it makes him understandable." Watson was surprised by his friend's humane interpretation. Holmes usually saw criminals as puzzles, but sometimes, on rare occasions, he saw their humanity too. The car stopped in front of Scotland Yard. Holmes and Watson got out. "I need to find Lestrade," said Holmes. "You go back to Baker Street, Watson. This afternoon, we'll go back to the club. We have more to discuss with the witnesses." Watson nodded. "Be careful, Holmes." Holmes smiled. "Always, my old friend, always." And as he walked down the street, disappearing into the fog, Watson watched his friend's silhouette grow smaller and smaller. An unfinished sentence told a whole story, and the end of that story was approaching. Chapter 4. The Past in the Shadows. Scotland Yard's grey stone building stood tall in the heart of London. As Holmes walked through the familiar corridors, officers respectfully made way for him. The detective's reputation inspired both admiration and sometimes envy within these walls. But today, Holmes's mind was far from such thoughts. Inspector Lestrade's office was on the second floor. The door was ajar, and the rustling of papers could be heard from inside. Holmes knocked and entered. Lestrade was sitting behind his desk, shuffling through a pile of files. When he saw Holmes, a look of relief appeared on his face. "Holmes, just in time. That Crow case. I've been thinking about it all night. Something's wrong, isn't it?" Holmes sat down in the chair opposite him. He took the hospital record and the diary out of his pocket and placed them on the desk. "It's not wrong, Lestrade. It's completely different. This is a murder, and we have serious evidence pointing to the killer." Lestrade examined the documents. His eyes widened as they scanned the lines. "Martin Vickers. Who is this man?" "Marcus Vance's real name. A criminal wanted for fraud and forgery 15 years ago. He created a false identity, built a new life, and Dr. Crow discovered this by chance years ago." Lestrade examined the numbers in the notebook. Blackmail. Crow was extorting money from Vance. Yes, monthly payments, increasing amounts. The last payment was £100. Vance couldn't take the pressure and found a way out. Holmes took out the medicine bottle. "We found this at Crow's house. These should be digitalis pills, but they're not. They're fake, useless placebos. Someone switched the doctor's medicine." Lestrade took the bottle and examined it. "And you suspect Vance?" "I suspect him. But we need proof. There's a fingerprint on this bottle that doesn't belong to Crow. If that print belongs to Vance, our case is made." Lestrade thought. "A fingerprint comparison? How will we get Vance's fingerprint? We can't arrest him. There's not enough evidence." Holmes smiled slightly. "No need to arrest him. At the club, there are dozens of objects Vance touched. Account books, pens, glasses. If you obtain these, we can make a comparison. Lestrade nodded. I can arrange that. But Holmes, there's a problem. I looked at Martin Vickers' file. He was wanted 15 years ago, but the case was closed. Statute of limitations. The statute of limitations may apply to old crimes, but there's no statute of limitations for murder, Lestrade. The inspector leaned on his desk. I need access to that file. I need more information about Vickers, his past, his associates, how he was caught. Holmes stood up. Someone can help with that. At the club, there's a retired policeman named Thomas Keane. He might have access to the old records. I know Keane, said Lestrade. He's a good man. He retired 10 years ago, but he still has connections. Then I need to talk to him. I'll go to the club this afternoon. You get those objects for fingerprint comparison. Holmes headed for the door. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped and turned. Lestrade, one more thing. Dr. Crowe had a colleague, Dr. Eleanor Marsh. She works at St. Bartholomew's. I need to talk to her too. Why? Is she a suspect? Holmes looked thoughtful. I don't know yet, but I need to understand Crowe's life at the hospital. Maybe he had enemies there too. Lestrade took note. Dr. Eleanor Marsh. I'll look into it. When Holmes left Scotland Yard, the sun had broken through the clouds. London was bustling with the midday rush. The cries of street vendors, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestones. It was the city's constant symphony. Holmes hailed a horse-drawn carriage and headed for St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The hospital was one of London's oldest and most respected medical institutions. Its Gothic architecture bore the weight of centuries. Holmes had walked these corridors before on various cases, but today he was investigating a colleague's past. At the reception desk, he asked for Dr. Eleanor Marsh. A young nurse directed him to the third floor, to the surgical department. Dr. Marsh's office was at the end of the corridor. Her name was written in gold letters on the door. Holmes knocked. Come in. The office was small but tidy. The walls were covered with medical diplomas and certificates. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and sharp eyes. Her white coat reflected the seriousness of her profession. Dr. Marsh, I'm Sherlock Holmes. May I have a few minutes of your time? The woman looked Holmes over. A flicker of recognition lit her eyes. Mr. Holmes, I've heard your name. Is this about Dr. Crowe's death? Yes. May I sit down? Dr. Marsh gestured to the chair opposite her. Holmes sat down. What was your relationship with Dr. Crowe? The woman paused for a moment. Her eyes drifted to the papers on her desk. We were colleagues. We worked in the same department, but we weren't close. Why? Dr. Marsh took a deep breath. Nathan Crowe was a difficult man, Mr. Holmes. He was a good surgeon, I can't deny that. But he was arrogant, aloof, and sometimes cruel. He was particularly harsh on young doctors. Towards you too. The woman gave a bitter smile. Especially towards me. I'm working to become chief surgeon at this hospital. Nathan did everything he could to prevent me from getting that position. He badmouthed me to the board, belittled my achievements. Holmes noted this information. So, there was competition between you. Competition? Dr. Marsh shook her head. It was a one-sided battle, Mr. Holmes. I was just trying to do my job. He was trying to stop me. Why? Why did he target you? The woman shrugged. Maybe he didn't want a woman in that position. Maybe he felt his own position was threatened. I don't know. I never fully understood Nathan's motivations. Holmes studied the woman thoughtfully. Dr. Marsh seemed angry but honest. She had a motive against Crow, but that alone didn't make her a killer. Dr. Marsh, did you notice any change in Dr. Crow's behavior recently? The woman thought. Actually, yes, he seemed more tense over the last few months. He was distracted in meetings, sometimes missed appointments. That wasn't like him at all. Nathan was always a punctual man. Could he have been having problems with someone at the hospital or outside? I don't know. Nathan never shared his personal life with anyone, but something caught my attention. Dr. Marsh paused. What was it? A few weeks ago, I saw Nathan in the hallway. He was talking on the phone quietly, but when I approached, he hung up immediately. His face was bright red. He looked angry. I heard him say, "This is the last time." Holmes's eyes lit up. This is the last time. Who was he saying that to? I don't know. He hung up the phone and walked away, ignoring me. Holmes stood up. Dr. Marsh, thank you for your help. One more question. Did you know Dr. Crow was using digitalis? The woman nodded. Yes, everyone knew. He had heart problems and had been taking medication for years. It's ironic, actually. A heart surgeon killed by his own heart. Holmes engraved this last sentence in his mind. Yes, it was ironic, but it was no coincidence. When he left the hospital, it was past 3 in the afternoon. Holmes headed straight for the East Wind Club. The club looked less impressive in the daylight. Details hidden in the shadows at night were now clearly visible. Cracks in the bricks, worn window frames, the worn steps in front of the door. But still, the building retained its former grandeur. Holmes entered. The lobby, unlike last night's crowd, was almost empty. Only a few members were reading newspapers in the corners. Bartender Simon Hadley was wiping glasses behind the bar. Holmes approached the bar. Mr. Hadley, I remember you. You were the one who saw the car that brought Dr. Crow last night. Simon recognized Holmes. Yes, sir. Mr. Holmes, isn't it? Correct. I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. Simon glanced around. Club President Oliver Trent was nowhere to be seen. Of course, sir. What would you like to know? Holmes leaned on the counter. You said last night Mr. Vance offered Dr. Crow a drink. What exactly happened? Simon thought. Dr. Crow came in, sat in his usual corner. Mr. Vance went straight over to him. They talked for a few minutes. Then Mr. Vance signalled to me. They wanted 2 brandies. I brought them. Did you hear their conversation? Not exactly, sir, but Mr. Vance seemed tense. Dr. Crow, on the other hand, calm but cold, as if he were imposing something. Holmes's eyes lit up. Imposing? What kind of imposition? Simon shrugged. I don't know, sir, just a feeling. When Dr. Crow looked at Mr. Vance, he looked like a man who had won. Mr. Vance, on the other hand, looked defeated. This observation supported Holmes's theory. Crow was continuing his blackmail. Vance, on the other hand, felt cornered. Well, what happened after Dr. Crow finished his drink? He read his newspaper for a while. Then he started writing something on that notepad, but he stopped halfway through. He leaned his head back in his chair and closed his eyes. I thought he had fallen asleep. But then Simon's voice trembled. Remembering last night affected him. Then what happened, Simon? Another member, Mr. Trent, went over to Dr. Crow. He touched his shoulder, and then he shouted, "The doctor is dead," he said. Holmes replayed this story in his mind. Crow had drunk his drink, started writing a note, stopped halfway, and died. The heart attack had come at that very moment. But this was no coincidence. Vance had been planning it for months. "Simon, one more thing. Where can I find Thomas Keene?" Simon pointed to a corner of the club. "Mr. Keene is usually in the library. He should be there at this hour." Holmes thanked Simon and headed for the library. The club's library was small but had a rich collection. The shelves were lined with leather-bound books. The light streaming in through the window illuminated the dust particles in the air. In a corner chair, an elderly man sat reading a book. Thomas Keene was a 55-year-old man with grey hair and a strong build. The lines on his face told of a difficult career. A retired police officer with years of experience. Holmes approached him. "Mr. Keene, I'm Sherlock Holmes." Keene looked up. There was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "Holmes, I've heard your name. My old friends at Scotland Yard speak of you." Holmes sat down in the chair opposite him. "Mr. Keene, I need your help. Have you ever heard the name Martin Vickers?" Keene's eyes narrowed. He looked thoughtful. "Martin Vickers. That name rings a bell. A very old case. 15, maybe 20 years ago. Fraud and deception. A small-time crook, but cunning." Keene nodded. "Yes, I remember now. Vickers would swindle wealthy widows, fake investment schemes, fictitious business partnerships. He was caught several times but always got away. Then one day he vanished. The case was closed due to the statute of limitations." Holmes pulled the hospital record from his pocket. He handed it to Keene. "Martin Vickers created a new identity. He became Marcus Vance, and now he's the treasurer of this club." Keene read the document. His eyes widened. "My God. Vance, I've known him for years. I knew him as a respectable man." "Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Keene, and now Vance is connected to a murder." Holmes told the whole story. The blackmail, the drug swap, Crow's death. Keene listened intently. "This is unbelievable, but it makes sense. Vickers was always clever. He avoided direct violence, used indirect means." "Mr. Keene, do you have access to old records? I need more information about Vickers, his associates, his methods, his weaknesses," Keene thought. "I have an old friend at Scotland Yard. He works in the archives. I can reach him." "If you do that, it would be a huge help." Keene stood up. "I'll go right away. I should have something by this evening." Holmes shook Keene's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Keene. This information could help us bring a killer to justice." After Keene left, Holmes remained in the library. He was deep in thought. The case was coming together piece by piece. Vance's past, Crow's blackmail, the drug switch, the fake death. Everything was falling into place, but there were still missing pieces. When had Vance switched the drugs? How had he gained access? And most importantly, why that night? Holmes knew he had to dig deeper to find the answers to these questions, but he was certain of one thing. Vance had planned everything. This was a cold-blooded, calculated murder, and Holmes was going to disrupt that plan. He looked out the window. The Thames flowed silently in the distance. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would bring more answers, and Marcus Vance would face the truth. Chapter 5. The Secret Carried by the Train. The next morning, an exciting piece of news awaited Holmes upon his return to Baker Street. Thomas Keene had worked through the night and uncovered important information from old files. The retired policeman appeared at the door, breathless, clutching a thick file. "Holmes," Keene said as he entered, "I found it. I found everything about Martin Vickers. Watson rose from the breakfast table. Holmes, as if he had been expecting this, took the file with a calm expression. "Sit down, Mr. Keene. Tell me." Keene sank into the armchair by the fireplace. His face showed fatigue, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. "Martin Vickers, born in 1865, the child of a poor family in Leeds. Got into crime at a young age, petty theft, fraud. But he was clever, very clever. Each time he either slipped through the net or got off with a light sentence." Holmes listened as he shuffled through the file. Yellowed papers, old ink stains, faded, photographs. "In 1885 he pulled off a major fraud," Keene continued. "He tricked a wealthy widow, took all her fortune. She committed suicide. Vickers was sought but never found. That's when he vanished." Watson listened in horror. "He caused a woman's death and got away with it." "Yes, and now we understand that he was reborn as Marcus Vance. A new identity, a new life, a new reputation." Holmes looked at a photograph in the file. A portrait of a young man, sharp features, cold eyes. Years had passed, but the resemblance was still visible. "Mr. Keene, is there anything else of interest in this file? Associates? Habits?" Keene thought. "One thing caught my attention. Vickers always used the same method when approaching his victims. First, he gained their trust. Then he did small favors for them. And then he trapped them, like a patient hunter." Holmes nodded. "That fits with the Dr. Crow case. Vance appeared to be a respected member of the club for years. No one suspected his past." "Until Crow discovered him," Watson interjected. "But Holmes, when did Vance switch the drugs? We know he went to Crow's house, but was that enough of an opportunity?" Holmes placed the file on the table. His eyes were thoughtful. "That question has been troubling me too, Watson. Crow's wife said Vance paid a brief visit. 10 minutes. Is that enough time to switch the drugs?" Keene shook his head. "It seems unlikely. Entering someone's room during a home visit and tampering with their medication, risky." Holmes stood up and walked to the window. Outside, London's morning traffic had begun. Horse-drawn carriages, pedestrians, vendors. "There must be another opportunity," Holmes said, as if talking to himself. "Another moment when Vance and Crow's paths crossed." He stopped suddenly. His eyes lit up. "The train." Watson and Keene looked at him in surprise. "The train?" Holmes turned, speaking excitedly. "Crow had a ticket. To Bristol in his pocket. He bought it yesterday but didn't go." "What about before that? Had Crow made other train journeys in recent weeks?" Watson understood. "Station records." "Exactly, Watson. Passenger records are kept at train stations. If Vance and Crow travelled on the same train..." Holmes grabbed his coat. "Keene, Watson, come with me. We're going to King's Cross." Half an hour later, the trio stood beneath the magnificent arches of King's Cross Station. Steam locomotives, passengers waiting on the platform, porters carrying luggage. The station was bustling with its usual crowds. Holmes headed for the station master's office. A letter bearing Scotland Yard's seal opened the doors. The station master, a middle-aged, mustachioed man, ushered them in. "Mr. Holmes, how can I help you?" "I need the passenger records for the last 3 weeks. Bristol line, first-class tickets." The manager called a clerk. Within a few minutes, a thick ledger was placed on the desk. Holmes began scanning the pages rapidly. His eyes danced across the lines. He stopped at one entry. "I found it." Watson and Keene leaned in. Holmes's finger pointed to an entry from 3 weeks earlier. November 3rd, 1895. Bristol Express, 9:15 a.m. first class, compartment 7. Dr. Nathan Crowe, seat of Mr. Marcus Vance, seat B. Watson couldn't believe his eyes. In the same compartment, sitting side by side. Holmes studied the record. First-class compartments are private. 4 seats, an enclosed space. The journey to Bristol takes about 2 hours. Keane understood. 2 hours in a closed space, side by side. Vance could have easily accessed Crowe's bag or coat during that time. Holmes nodded. Crowe probably dozed off or went to the toilet at some point. That short time gave Vance enough opportunity to switch the medicine bottle. Watson marvelled at the complexity of the plan. Vance planned everything in advance. He bought a ticket for the same train as Crowe, settled into the same compartment. This can't be a coincidence. It definitely wasn't a coincidence, said Holmes. Vance knew Crowe's travel plans. Maybe he learned it from conversations at the club, maybe from another source. And using that information, he created the perfect opportunity. The station manager listened to this conversation in astonishment. Gentlemen, is this about a murder? Holmes turned to the manager. Yes, Mr. Manager. And this recording is important evidence. You'll need to officially report it to Scotland Yard. The manager nodded and gave instructions to an officer. Holmes was deep in thought as he left the station. The case was becoming clearer. But something was still missing. Direct, undeniable proof. Watson, said Holmes as they walked, what's the status of the fingerprint comparison? Any word from Lestrade? Watson pulled a note from his pocket. A message arrived this morning. Lestrade has collected several items from the club that Vance touched. The ledger, a glass, a pen. They're being compared. How long will that take? A few more hours. We'll have the results this afternoon. Holmes nodded. Then while we wait, let's have another talk with Vance. I want to put some pressure on him. Keane looked concerned. Be careful, Holmes. Vickers is a dangerous man. He might act like a cornered animal. Holmes smiled slightly. Don't worry, Mr. Keane. I can be dangerous too. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Holmes and Watson walked through the doors of the East Wind Club. The club maintained its usual calm atmosphere. A few members were reading newspapers or chatting in the lounges. Marcus Vance was working among the account books in the club's office. When he saw Holmes, a momentary look of tension flashed across his face. Then he put on a forced smile. Mr. Holmes again? These visits are becoming more frequent. Holmes sat down uninvited in the chair opposite him. Watson stood by the door. Mr. Vance, or should I say Mr. Vickers? Vance's face froze for a moment. His eyes widened, then quickly returned to normal. But that brief moment gave everything away. What do you mean? Holmes took the old photograph out of his pocket. He placed it on the table. Martin Vickers, born in Leeds, a former criminal wanted for fraud and forgery, disappeared in 1885, held responsible for a woman's death, and now living a new life as Marcus Vance. Vance's face turned pale. His hands began to tremble. This is a mistake. I am Marcus Vance. I come from a respectable family. I have references. Fake references, Holmes said coldly. Just like your fake identity. Dr. Crowe discovered this years ago, didn't he? He saw your name in the old records at St. Bartholomew's. You were treated as Martin Vickers. Vance recoiled in his chair. His eyes searched for an escape route. I don't know what you're talking about. Holmes leaned over the table. His voice was low but sharp. Crowe blackmailed you. You've been paying him for months, increasing amounts, and finally, you couldn't take it anymore. No. 3 weeks ago, you were in the same compartment on the Bristol Express. Side by side, a 2-hour journey. That's when you switched his medication, isn't it? Vance jumped to his feet. This is nonsense. You have no proof. Holmes also stood up. The two men on either side of the table stared at each other. You want proof? Your fingerprints are on Dr. Crow's medicine bottle. Right thumb on the side of the bottle. The finger you used to count the numbers, as befits an accountant. Vance's face fell. All his resistance melted away in an instant. I just what, Mr. Vance? Just killed a man. Planned it for weeks, coldly, without leaving a trace. Vance slumped back into his chair. He covered his face with his hands. You don't understand, he said in a hoarse voice. That man was a monster. He exploited me for years. He wanted more and more every month. He threatened my career, my life, everything. There was nothing I could do. Watson watched from the doorway. The man's collapse was both satisfying and sad. Holmes softened his voice. Tell me, Mr. Vance. Tell me everything. Vance lowered his hands. His eyes were red, filled with tears. Years ago I made a mistake. I was young and foolish. Poverty, despair. I cheated people. Then I ran away, built a new life. I tried to be honest, I really did. But your past caught up with you. Vance nodded. Crow saw my name in old records. Martin Vickers. He recognized me, remembered my face. And then the blackmail began. How long has this been going on? 2 years. I've been paying every month for 2 years. £50 at first, then 100, then more. It never ends. It's never enough. Holmes listened to the man's story. The helplessness of a blackmail victim was clearly written on his face. And then, what happened? Vance took a deep breath. A few months ago, Crow wanted more. Not just money, he wanted access to the club's funds. I was the treasurer, it would have been easy. But that would have been theft. If I got caught, I'd lose everything. And you looked for a way out. Vance bowed his head. I know Crow has heart disease. I know he takes digitalis. I spoke to a pharmacist, had fake pills made. Placebos, sugar and starch, nothing else. Watson, with his medical knowledge, interjected. You knew what would happen to a man with heart disease if he didn't take his medicine. Yes, his heart gradually weakens. Under stress, with fatigue. Eventually it can't take it. Holmes listened carefully to the man's confession. When did you switch the pills? The Bristol train, 3 weeks ago. Crow was going to a meeting. I boarded the same train, the same compartment. He fell asleep. During the journey, I got into his bag, changed the bottle. And then you waited. Vance nodded. Every day I waited for him to die. It was a terrible wait, but I had no choice. Holmes was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. Mr. Vance, we've heard your confession. Watson is a witness. I'm going to hand you over to Scotland Yard. Vance nodded with surprising calm. I know, actually, I'm relieved. Carrying this burden was very heavy. Holmes headed for the door. Watson, call Lestrade. Mr. Vance, please wait here. Vance didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the Thames outside the window. Mr. Holmes, Vance said as Holmes was about to leave, may I ask a question? Holmes stopped and turned. How did you find me? What mistake? Holmes thought for a moment. Then he replied, The shoes, Mr. Vance. Dr. Crow's shoes. A rainy evening, the banks of the Thames, wet pavements. But his shoes were bone dry. Someone had driven him right up to the door. And that someone was part of the plan. Vance shook his head with a bitter smile. A small detail I hadn't thought of that. Small details, Mr. Vance. Always small details. Holmes left the room. Behind him lay the collapse of a murderer. Chapter 6. Sugar and Poison. Scotland Yard's laboratory was located in the basement of the building, in a dim and cool room. The stone walls were slightly stained and mossy in places, the result of years of accumulated moisture. The single window just below street level was small and dirty. Only a faint light filtered in. Therefore, gas lamps were placed in every corner of the room, adding a slight smell of soot to the air. The walls were covered with shelves from floor to ceiling. Glass bottles, brown and blue-capped, contained various chemicals. Microscopes, magnifying glasses, glass tubes, metal spatulas, and various analytical instruments were arranged in an orderly fashion. A sharp chemical smell hung in the air, a remnant of years of experimentation, a mixture of sulfur, ammonia, and alcohol. Disturbing to some, familiar and comforting to Holmes. Sherlock Holmes sat at the head of the long oak table, examining the glass bottle in front of him. Dr. Crow's digitalis bottle was no longer just a medicine container. It was the most critical piece of evidence in a murder case. When he held it up to the light, the fingerprints on the glass surface glowed faintly. Holmes had studied these prints for hours, committing every line and curve to memory. Dr. Watson stood beside him, watching his friend's work with curiosity. Inspector Lestrade, meanwhile, was at the other end of the table, tapping his foot impatiently. Lestrade was not a man who liked to wait. He wanted action. He wanted results. "The fingerprint results are in," Lestrade finally said, placing the file on the table. His voice carried both excitement and relief. "And you were right, Holmes. The fingerprint on the bottle belongs to Marcus Vance. It matches without a shadow of a doubt." Holmes opened the file. Inside were enlarged images of the fingerprints. They had been transferred to paper using a special technique, making every detail visible. The first image was the print taken from Crow's medicine bottle. The second was the print taken from Vance's crystal glass at the club. Holmes placed the two images side by side, then superimposed them. The lines, the curves, the branches, they matched perfectly. "Right thumb," said Holmes, examining the print. His voice was calm but satisfied. "On the side of the bottle, exactly where you'd hold it to open the cap. Look at this spot, Watson." He pointed to a specific place. "This small scar on the tip of the thumb is also on Vance's hand. He cut himself on some paper last year, leaving a mark. This is too specific a detail to be a coincidence." Watson examined the mark with a magnifying glass. Indeed, there was a small cut in the center of the fingerprint, a straight line. "Incredible," said Watson, shaking his head. "This is definitive proof, Holmes. It shows that Vance had access to Crow's medication, that he touched the bottle." "More than touched it, Watson." Holmes pointed to a small glass jar on the table. The jar was clean and transparent, containing several white pills. The pills looked ordinary, like any medications sold in a pharmacy. "I analyzed these pills. I worked on them all night. The results are extremely illuminating." Lestrade approached the pills. He squinted as he examined them. "Are these fake pills? How can you tell? They look normal to me." Holmes stood up. He walked over to the instruments on the table. He took a glass tube and poured some liquid into it. Then he picked up one of the pills with tweezers and dropped it into the liquid. "Watch," said Holmes. The pill began to dissolve slowly in the liquid. but not as expected. Real digitalis would cause a specific color change in this solution, a slight greenish tint. But this pill turned the liquid a cloudy white. There was no green tint at all. Do you see? Holmes held the tube up to the light. Real digitalis contains a glycoside derived from the digitalis purpurea plant. This substance produces a characteristic color when it reacts with certain chemicals. But these pills... He placed the tube on the table. These pills are just sugar and starch, perhaps a little lime to mimic the taste and texture. But there is no active ingredient. They are completely useless placebos. Watson, with his medical knowledge, grasped the seriousness of the situation. For a heart patient, this is disastrous. Digitalis regulates the heartbeat and increases muscle strength. Without the medication, the heart gradually weakens. Especially in chronic patients, serious complications begin within a few weeks. Exactly, Watson. Holmes sat back down at the table. Dr. Crow had been using digitalis for 2 years. His heart was dependent on this drug. When the drug was stopped, the heart muscle weakened. Stress, fatigue, excitement. Any trigger could have led to a heart attack. Lestrade frowned. So Vance didn't poison him. He just stopped his medication. Technically, correct, said Holmes. And that shows the genius of the plan. If poison had been used, it would have been found in the autopsy. If a knife or gun had been used, there would be evidence. But replacing the medication with a fake, that leaves no trace. The autopsy shows a natural heart attack. No one suspects anything. Watson marveled at the complexity of this plan. As someone with medical training, he knew how fragile the human body could be. But using that knowledge as a murder weapon, that was something else. Vance, how did he get these pills? Watson asked. Does he have pharmaceutical knowledge, or did he produce them himself? Holmes took a small notebook out of his pocket. He flipped through the pages, stopping at a specific place. Last night, I spent a few hours in Whitechapel. In the dark corners of London, there are people who don't answer unasked questions. One of them is a pharmacist named Gerald Palmer. He owns Palmer's Pharmacy, a small, dirty shop, tucked away in the back streets. He does business that doesn't appear in the official records. Lestrade frowned. Is he producing illegal drugs? Let's say he dances on the line between illegal and legal. Holmes looked at his notebook. I visited Palmer. At first he didn't want to talk, but my persuasion methods were effective. He confessed that a few weeks ago a middle-aged, well-dressed gentleman came in. The man placed a special order. Placebos that looked like digitalis pills, but contained no active ingredient. Palmer didn't ask any questions. The money was good. The job was easy. Watson tried to digest this information. Vance planned it weeks in advance. He had the fake pills made, waited for his chance, and finally switched the drugs. Yes. And he was extremely careful while doing it. But he made a mistake. Holmes lifted the medicine bottle. He forgot to wipe his fingerprints off it. Maybe he was in a hurry, maybe he was careless. But that small mistake gave him away. Lestrade took out his notebook. Palmer's Pharmacy, owner Gerald Palmer. I'll have to question him too. Manufacturing fake drugs is a serious crime, punishable by imprisonment. Do that, Lestrade, but make Vance your priority. Palmer is just a tool. The real culprit is the man who designed and executed this plan. Holmes reviewed all the evidence on the table once more. The bottle, the pills, the fingerprint records, the train ticket, the half-written note, the hospital record, the diary. Each piece was a part of a great puzzle. And now the puzzle was complete. The picture was clear. "Watson," Holmes said thoughtfully, "this case has taught me a lot. The most dangerous murders aren't those committed in a fit of rage. They're the ones planned over weeks, even months, with every detail calculated." Vance waited like a patient hunter. He watched his victim weaken. And finally, he chose the perfect moment. Watson studied the expression on his friend's face. There was satisfaction there, the satisfaction of having solved the case. But there was also sadness, the sadness of confronting the dark side of human nature. "What do you think, Holmes?" Holmes was silent for a moment. His eyes were fixed on the evidence on the table, but his mind was elsewhere. Then he spoke. Was Vance a bad man? He committed crimes in the past. He deceived people. But for the last 15 years, he tried to live an honest life. Maybe he really had changed. Maybe the darkness inside him was behind him. But his past caught up with him, and he fell into the hands of a blackmailer. He was cornered, driven to despair. And in the end, he did what he saw as his only way out. Lestrade frowned. His voice was harsh. "You feel sympathy for Crowe? The man was a blackmailer." "No," Holmes said firmly. "I don't sympathize with Crowe. He was guilty too. Blackmail is a serious crime. Cornering a person, exploiting them for months, years, threatening everything they have. In a sense, Crowe prepared his own death. His greed brought about his end." Watson listened silently to this philosophical assessment. Holmes rarely spoke like this. He usually viewed criminals as puzzles, avoiding emotional judgments. Cases presented him with an intellectual challenge, not an emotional burden. But this case had affected him. "Still," Holmes continued, rising to his feet, "murder is murder. Vance took the law into his own hands. He was judge, jury, and executioner. He had no right to do that. And now he will pay the price." Lestrade also stood up. "Vance is still being held at the club. I'm preparing the necessary paperwork for his formal arrest. He'll be transferred to Newgate Prison this evening." Holmes reached for his coat. The heavy woolen fabric settled over his shoulders. "I'm going to the club too. I want to have a final talk with Vance." Watson was surprised. "Why? We already know everything." He confessed. Evidence is complete." Holmes picked up his hat. There was a familiar gleam in his eyes, the gleam of an unsolved problem. "He confessed, yes, but he didn't tell the whole story. Why that night? Why did he wait until that particular evening for Crowe to die? He had changed the medication 3 weeks earlier. Crowe could have died at any moment, but Vance chose a specific night. He called him to the club, picked him up in his car, brought him in front of everyone. There must be a trigger, a reason. Lestrade and Watson looked at each other. Holmes's mind was always one step ahead. While others saw the case as closed, he was still asking questions. "I'll meet you at the club, Lestrade," said Holmes, walking toward the door. "Watson, come with me." When they stepped outside, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds. London's grey sky was illuminated by a rare patch of blue. The streets were crowded, people rushing about their daily business. The cries of vendors, the clatter of wheels, the city's constant symphony. Holmes and Watson hailed a horse-drawn carriage. As they set off for the East Wind Club, Holmes gazed out the window. Thoughtful, silent. "Holmes," Watson said a few minutes later, "do you think Vance will be hanged?" Holmes turned. His face was serious. "Probably. Premeditated murder, aggravating circumstances, The jury will find him guilty, and the judge will likely give him the maximum sentence. Watson felt the weight of that thought. A man's life would end in a few weeks. A knot tightening, a lid opening, a body falling. Justice or revenge? The lines sometimes blurred. Do you think he's sorry? Holmes shrugged. Remorse. It's a complex emotion, Watson. People can regret their actions but also feel relieved. Vance had been crushed under the pressure of blackmail for 2 years. He paid money every month, lived under threat every day. Crow's death may have given him a kind of freedom. Temporary freedom, yes, but freedom nonetheless. The car was approaching the banks of the Thames. The river glistened in the afternoon light, tiny ripples dancing on its surface. Seagulls glided over the water, occasionally diving to catch fish. The East Wind Club looked less impressive in the afternoon light. At night, shadows and gas lamps gave the building an air of mystery. But the daylight was merciless, revealing every flaw. Cracks in the bricks, worn window frames, the worn steps in front of the door. Still, the building retained its former grandeur, a relic of the past in the shadow of the future. Holmes and Watson entered. The lobby, unlike last night's crowd, was almost empty. Only a few members were reading newspapers in the corners or whispering. Everyone was aware of the incident. Rumours had spread. Whispers had multiplied. A murder in the middle of a respectable club. A scandal. Bartender Simon Hadley was wiping glasses behind the bar. He bowed his head slightly when he saw Holmes, a respectful greeting. Holmes approached the bar. Mr. Hadley, where is Mr. Vance being held? Simon pointed upstairs. In one of the small rooms, sir. An officer is waiting at the door. He is not allowed to leave. Holmes thanked him and headed for the stairs. Watson followed behind him. Upstairs, the corridor was quiet. The walls were covered with old paintings, portraits of members from years past. Serious faces, stern gazes. They were all dead now, immortalized only in paint. At the end of the corridor, a young police officer stood guard in front of a closed door. He recognized Holmes and immediately stepped aside. Mr. Holmes, you may enter. Holmes opened the door. The room was small, with a table, 2 chairs and a window. The Thames could be seen from the window, but the view was now melancholy. Marcus Vance was looking out the window. He didn't turn around. Mr. Holmes, said Vance in a tired voice, his voice hoarse, the voice of someone who hadn't slept properly for days. You've come again. I suppose this is the last visit. Holmes closed the door behind him. Watson also entered and stood in the corner. I have a few last questions, Mr. Vance. Then I won't bother you anymore. Vance turned. His face was pale, dark circles under his eyes. His hair was dishevelled, his usually neatly combed brown hair now a mess. His tie was loose, his jacket wrinkled. The neat, confident man they had seen a few days ago had now been replaced by a broken figure. What do you want to know? I've told you everything. Holmes sat down on the chair beside the table. Vance sat down too, with a weary movement. Have you told me everything, Mr. Vance? Really? Vance frowned. What do you mean? Holmes spoke carefully. You changed his medication 3 weeks ago. From that moment on, Crow could have died at any moment. His heart was failing. Medically, it was an inevitable outcome. But you waited 3 weeks. And then you chose a specific night. You called him to the cabin, picked him up in your car, brought him in front of everyone. Why? Vance was silent for a moment. His eyes fell to the table. His fingers trembled slightly. Why that night? The silence stretched. Outside, a seagull screeched. Somewhere in the distance, a chimney sweep was singing. Finally, Vance spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Crow called me that day, in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, on the phone. I'd never heard his voice sound so cruel. What did he say? He wanted more than ever. Not just money anymore. Vance's hands clenched into fists. He wanted access to the club's safe, £10,000, within a week, or he'd expose everything. He'd go to the police, to the newspapers. My life would be over. Holmes listened. His face showed no expression, only attentive listening. And what did you do? I panicked. Vance's voice cracked. £10,000. I didn't have that kind of money. And if I touched the safe, I'd be caught in an audit, theft charges. Everything would be over, not just my past, but my present life too. Vance stood up and walked to the window. His back was turned to Holmes. Then I thought, it had been 3 weeks since the medication change. Crow's heart must already have been weakened. Not as a doctor, but I had researched it. I knew what would happen if the digitalis was cut off, if I put him under stress, if I provoked him enough. A heart attack could be triggered. Vance nodded. Yes, I called him to the club. He was going to Bristol, had already bought his ticket. I said I'd give him the money tonight. All of it, £10,000. At the club, in front of everyone. A safe place. No one would suspect. And he agreed. Of course he agreed. His eyes lit up at the mention of money, like a starving animal. There was disgust in Vance's voice. I picked him up in my car. It was raining. He didn't want to get wet. In the car, I told him I couldn't find the money. I needed another week, just 1 week. He got angry. He went crazy. Vance turned, looked at Holmes. His eyes were shining. It was unclear whether they were tears or anger. He yelled, threatened me, said he'd ruin me. His face turned bright red. His veins bulged. In the car, in that confined space, he poured all his rage on me. Watson listened quietly by the door. He could picture the scene Vance described. A dark car, the sound of rain, 2 men confronting each other. When we got to the cabin, Vance continued, Crow was still angry, but he was trying to control himself, trying to appear calm in front of others. I offered him a glass of brandy. I pretended to try to calm him down. But I knew his heart wouldn't hold out. Too much stress, too much anger, too weak a heart. And that's what happened. Vance bowed his head. Half an hour later, in his chair reading his newspaper, he leaned his head back, closed his eyes. Everyone thought he was asleep. But I knew. A deep silence fell over the room, the ticking of the clock, the sound of footsteps from somewhere far away. Holmes asked his final question. Do you regret it? Vance didn't answer for a long time. He looked out the window, watching the slow flow of the Thames. Regret? His voice was tired, empty. I don't know, Mr. Holmes. I really don't know. Crow ruined my life. He exploited me for 2 years, took everything from me. My money, my peace of mind, my sleep. Killing him was liberation. I could finally breathe. He turned and looked at Holmes. There was a strange expression in his eyes, neither regret nor triumph. Just exhaustion. But now I'll rot in another cell, behind Newgate's dark walls. It's a kind of prison too, isn't it? Just different walls. I escaped Crow's blackmail, only to fall into the clutches of the law. Holmes stood up. His face was serious, but there was a softness in his voice. Mr. Vance, what you did was wrong. Crow was wrong too. You both broke the law. But murder is unforgivable. There were other ways. You could have gone to the police, reported the blackmail. Yes, your past would have come out. Yes, you might have been punished. But at least you wouldn't have been a murderer. Vance shook his head with a bitter smile. Easy to say, Mr. Holmes. Have you ever been backed into a corner? Ever been threatened with losing everything? Despair? Despair changes a man. You can't think, you just try to survive. Holmes walked to the door. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped and turned. Everyone has hard times, Mr. Vance. Everyone gets cornered sometimes. But what defines us is what we do in those moments. You chose the easy way out, and now you'll pay the price. Vance said nothing. He just bowed his head as if accepting the weight of those words. Holmes and Watson left the room. Lestrade was waiting in the hallway. He had handcuffs in his hand. Is the conversation over? Holmes nodded. Yes, he confessed everything. Tomorrow I will make an announcement to the club members. I will tell the whole story. Lestrade entered the room. A few minutes later, Marcus Vance came out, his hands cuffed. His face was expressionless, his eyes empty. As he descended the stairs, several members in the lobby looked at him. Whispers rose, heads turned. Holmes and Watson walked out of the club's door. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. The Thames reflected these colours, glowing like a river of flames. Holmes, Watson said as they walked. This case, it affected you, didn't it? Holmes looked at the river. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. Every case affects me, Watson. Every murder tells a story, and every story teaches us something about human nature. This case taught me this. The most dangerous weapon is not a knife or a gun. It is despair. Watson pondered his friend's words. They walked silently along the banks of the Thames, in the light of the setting sun. Tomorrow, the final curtain would rise, and all secrets would be revealed. Chapter 7. The End of the Illusion. The next morning, London awoke unusually sunny. Such a clear sky was rare in the last days of November. The clouds had dispersed and a blue dome stretched over the city. The sun's rays sparkled on the surface of the Thames like thousands of tiny diamonds. The streets were illuminated by this unexpected beauty. At 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes had woken up early. Had he actually slept? Watson wasn't sure. When he found his friend in the sitting room, Holmes was sitting in front of the fireplace, reviewing his notes with a stack of papers in his hand. His coffee had gone cold and stood untouched on the table. "Good morning, Holmes," said Watson, coming out of his room. "Did you sleep at all?" Holmes raised his head. There were slight shadows under his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp as ever, his mind clear. "A few hours, enough. Today is an important day, Watson. I was preparing for the announcement at the club." Watson sat down next to his friend. Mrs. Hudson entered just in time with the breakfast tray. Freshly baked bread, butter, jam, and hot tea. The woman frowned when she saw Holmes's untouched coffee, but said nothing. She had worked in this house for years and knew Holmes's habits. "What time are they expecting me?" Watson asked, pouring his tea. 11 o'clock. Club President Oliver Trent has gathered all the members. Everyone wants to know the truth. Holmes placed his notes on the table. "And I will give them the truth, in all its nakedness." Watson studied the expression on his friend's face. There was determination there, but also a weight. This case had affected Holmes. It was no longer just an intellectual puzzle, but a story filled with human drama. "Holmes," Watson said hesitantly. "What do you think of Vance? Is he really a bad man?" Holmes thought for a moment. He looked at the fire in the fireplace, watching the flames dance. "Human nature is complex, Watson. Vance committed once crimes in the past. He deceived people, caused a woman's death. But then he tried to change. For 15 years, he lived an honest life, or at least tried to appear that way. Maybe he had changed deep down, or maybe he was just afraid of getting caught. We'll never know." "What about Crowe?" Holmes's face hardened. Crowe was a different kind of criminal. On the surface, a respected doctor, a prominent member of society, but in the dark, an extortionist who preyed on another man's weakness. He dragged Vance along for 2 years, demanding more each month. In the end, his own greed killed him. Watson digested this assessment. So, they were both guilty. Yes, both were guilty, but only one killed the other. And murder, Watson, murder is always the gravest crime. Blackmail is bad, fraud is bad, but to take a man's life, that crosses a line of no return. Holmes stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the morning traffic on Baker Street had begun. Horse-drawn, carriages, pedestrians, vendors. A normal day for normal people. But for Holmes, today was the closing day of a case. "Get ready, Watson. We're leaving in an hour." At 10:30, Holmes and Watson stood in front of the East Wind Club. The building looked more vibrant in the morning sun. Its brick facade glowed with a warm redness, its windows reflecting the light. Several horse-drawn carriages were parked in front of the door, the members' carriages. When they entered, they saw that the lobby was crowded. At least 30 people, maybe more. Men, women, young and old. All were neatly dressed, all whispering with serious faces. There was tension in the air, a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Oliver Trent, the club president, greeted them at the door. The old man looked more tired than usual. The circles under his eyes showed he had spent sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said Trent, shaking their hands. "Thank you for coming. Everyone is impatient to learn the truth. This uncertainty, it's getting on everyone's nerves." Holmes nodded. "I understand, Mr. Trent. Today, all questions will be answered." Trent led them into the main hall. The hall had been rearranged for this special meeting. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle. In the centre was a speaker's podium. The windows were open and fresh air flowed in. Holmes walked toward the podium. Behind him, Watson stood in a corner. Lestrade had also arrived at the back, as an official observer. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to Holmes. Holmes glanced around for a moment. He studied the faces of these people. Curiosity, fear, suspicion, anxiety. A different emotion on every face. But they all had one thing in common: the need to know the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Holmes, his voice calm but powerful, filling the room. 4 days ago, a tragedy occurred in this club. Dr. Nathan Crowe was found dead in a corner of this room. At first glance, it appeared to be a natural death, a sudden heart attack. Unfortunate, but an ordinary occurrence. Holmes paused for a moment. His eyes scanned the room. But it was not natural. Dr. Crowe was murdered. This was a carefully planned, cold-blooded murder. The room filled with a murmur. Whispers, shocked looks, objections. Trent made a calming gesture, but it wasn't very effective. Holmes raised his hand. Silence slowly returned. "I will tell you how this murder was committed. Every step, every clue, every detail. And in the end, you will learn who the killer is. You already know, most of you have heard about it. But I want to tell you the whole story. Holmes took a small notebook out of his pocket. He glanced at his notes, then began. The first clue was Dr. Crow's shoes. It was raining the night of the incident. On the banks of the Thames, wet sidewalks, puddles. But the doctor's shoes were completely dry. It was a simple observation, but it raised a critical question. How did Dr. Crow get to this club? Holmes walked to the window. He looked outside as if reliving that night. Club rules prohibit private cars from pulling up to the door. Everyone knows that. But that night, someone broke that rule. Someone drove Dr. Crow right up to the door. That someone was seen by our bartender, Simon Hadley. In the dark, in the rain, but he still saw him. Simon Hadley nodded from the crowd. His testimony was confirmed. Holmes continued. The second clue was the train ticket in Dr. Crow's pocket. To Bristol for the next morning. This ticket had been purchased that afternoon, so the doctor shouldn't have been here that night. He was planning to go to Bristol, but at the last minute, he changed his plans. Why? The room listened, holding its breath. Holmes, like a skilled storyteller, had his audience in the palm of his hand. The third clue was an unfinished note on Dr. Crow's desk, written in shaky handwriting, MV final payment. The sentence ended there. It was as if the writer had suddenly stopped, or been stopped. Holmes took a copy of the note out of his pocket. He held it up for everyone to see. MV initials. There is a person in this club with those initials. Marcus Vance, your treasurer. The crowd murmured. Some knew Vance's name. They had heard he had been arrested. But now the details of the story were coming out. Holmes placed his notes on the table. He lowered his voice, adopting a more intimate tone. But these clues alone did not prove a murder. The shoes, the ticket, the half note. These only raised questions. They provided no answers. The real clues lay deeper. Holmes began to walk. He moved around the room among the listeners. At Dr. Crow's house, we found a locked box. Inside was a 15-year-old hospital record. This record showed that Marcus Vance's real name was Martin Vickers. Vickers was a criminal wanted for fraud and forgery in the past. He had created a false identity and built a new life. The room fell silent in shock. This information was new to most. Vance was a man they had known and trusted for years, and now they were learning he was a fraud. Dr. Crow had discovered this secret years ago, and he began to use it. Blackmail, monthly payments, increasing amounts. Vance paid Crow for 2 years. Every month, £50, £100 more. But Crow's greed knew no bounds. Holmes turned back to the podium. His voice grew stronger. 4 days before the incident, Crow made his final move. He called Vance, demanding £10,000 within a week and access to the safe, or he would reveal everything. Vance was cornered. He had no money, nowhere to run, and then he made a plan. Holmes took a small glass vial from his pocket, a digitalis vial. Dr. Crow had a heart condition. He had been taking digitalis for years. This medicine regulates the heartbeat, strengthens the heart muscle. When the medicine is stopped, the heart gradually weakens. Under stress, fatigue, excitement, a heart attack becomes inevitable. He raised the bottle in the air. 3 weeks ago, Vance and Crow travelled on the same train, the Bristol Express, in the same compartment, side by side, a 2-hour journey. And during that journey, Vance found his opportunity. While Crow was asleep, or when he went to the bathroom, he accessed his bag. He took the medicine bottle and replaced it with another bottle filled with fake pills. Watson listened to his friend's account. Holmes presented a complex case in a simple and understandable way. Each detail connected to the next. Each clue was a piece of the larger picture. The fake pills, Holmes continued, were made of sugar, starch, and chalk, completely harmless substances. But for a heart patient, taking these pills thinking they were real medicine was a fatal mistake. Dr. Crow didn't take real medicine for 3 weeks. His heart grew weaker day by day. Holmes placed the bottle on the table. And then, the day of the incident arrived. Crow called Vance and asked for £10,000. Vance invited him to the club. He said he would give him the money, but his real intention was different: to stress Crow out, to make him angry, to strain his heart. Holmes walked to the window. Outside, the Thames flowed silently. Vance picked Crow up in his car. On the way, he told him he couldn't find the money. Crow went mad. He shouted, threatened. His face turned bright red with rage. His heart, already weakened, couldn't withstand the stress. Holmes turned and looked at the living room. When they arrived at the club, Crow was still angry but trying to control himself. Vance offered him a glass of brandy. He pretended to be trying to calm him down, but he was actually waiting. Half an hour later, Crow leaned his head back in his chair. He closed his eyes and never opened them again. A deep silence fell over the room. People seemed to have forgotten even to breathe. This, ladies and gentlemen, was a perfect murder. A murder that left no trace, aroused no suspicion, and appeared natural. The autopsy showed a heart attack. There was no poison. No signs of beating, no signs of struggle. No one suspected anything. Holmes paused for a moment. His eyes shifted to Lestrade, then back to the room. But every crime leaves a trace. Every murderer makes a mistake. Vance's mistake was small, but fatal. When he touched the medicine bottle, he forgot to wipe his fingerprint. That fingerprint gave him away. Holmes took fingerprint comparison documents from his pocket. Analysis conducted at Scotland Yard's laboratory conclusively proved that the fingerprint on the bottle belonged to Marcus Vance. This is irrefutable evidence. Oliver Trent stood up. His voice was trembling. Mr. Holmes, this is unbelievable. Vance was among us for years. We trusted him, entrusted him with our money. And he was a murderer. Holmes shook his head. Yes, Mr. Trent, but he was also a victim of Crow's blackmail. That doesn't excuse him, but it makes him understandable. When a man is cornered, when he is driven to despair, he sometimes chooses the darkest paths. A woman's voice rose from the room. Lydia Crow, the victim's wife. Dressed in black mourning clothes, she looked pale and weary. Mr. Holmes, the woman said, her voice calm but full of pain. Are you saying my husband was a blackmailer? Holmes turned to the woman. There was compassion in his eyes. Mrs. Crow, I'm sorry. Your husband appeared to be a respectable man, but in the dark, he exploited another's weakness. That doesn't mean he deserved to be killed. But the facts are the facts. The woman bowed her head. Her shoulders shook, but she did not cry. Perhaps her tears had long since dried. Holmes turned back to the podium to deliver his final words. Ladies and gentlemen, this case has taught me a great deal. The most dangerous. Murders are not the flashy ones. Knife wounds, gunshots, bloodstains. These attract attention, prompt an investigation. But silent murders, invisible murders, these are the most dangerous. Holmes scanned the room one last time. Marcus Vance is currently in Newgate Prison. He will be tried and most likely found guilty. Justice, albeit delayed, will prevail. But this case has taught us all a lesson. Appearances can be deceiving. People we think we know may actually be strangers, and secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually come to light. Holmes stepped down from the podium. The room fell silent for a moment. Then slowly, applause began. First a few people, then more. Finally, the entire room was standing and applauding. Watson approached his friend. Holmes's face wore an expression of weariness but satisfaction. An excellent explanation, Holmes. Holmes smiled faintly. Thank you, Watson. But the real work was gathering the evidence. The explanation was merely the final curtain. Oliver Trent approached them. He extended his hand. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, on behalf of our club, I thank you. You have shed light on this terrible affair. Now we can mourn in peace, however complicated it may be." Holmes shook the man's hand. "You're welcome, Mr. Trent. Justice is everyone's right, the victims as well as the accuseds." When they left the club, the sun was high in the sky. It was noon, London's liveliest hour. The streets were crowded. Life went on. Holmes and Watson began walking along the banks of the Thames. The river sparkled in the sunlight. Seagulls glided over the water. Fishing boats moved slowly along. "Holmes," Watson said after a while, "this case is over, but you still look pensive." Holmes looked at the river. There was a distant look in his eyes. "I'm thinking, Watson. This case reminded me of the complexity of human nature. Was Vance a bad man? Was Crowe a good man? The answers are never black and white. There is both light and darkness within everyone. Which one prevails depends on momentary decisions." Watson pondered his friend's words. Holmes rarely spoke so philosophically. Logic and evidence were usually his world, but sometimes, in rare moments, he would peer into the depths of the human heart. "Vance couldn't see any other options," Holmes continued. "He could have gone to the police, reported the blackmail. Yes, his past would have come out. Yes, he would have been punished, but at least he wouldn't have become a murderer. Now, he will spend the rest of his life either in prison or on the gallows." Watson was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "What about Crowe? Do you feel sorry for him?" Holmes shook his head. "Feel sorry? No. Crowe brought this on himself, exploiting a man for 2 years, threatening everything he had, driving him to despair. That was playing with fire. And in the end, that fire consumed him." They reached the bridge. Westminster Bridge arched gracefully over the Thames. Holmes leaned on the railing, watching the river. "Watson, you know, this case taught me something else." "What is it?" Holmes turned and looked at his friend. There was a rare warmth in his eyes. "The value of friendship. You were by my side every step of the way in this case, examining evidence, questioning witnesses, walking dangerous streets. You never complained, never backed down. That, Watson, is priceless." Watson was taken aback by this unexpected praise. Holmes rarely expressed his feelings. This moment was special. "Holmes," said Watson, his voice slightly trembling, "you would have done the same for me. We've been working together for years. This is not just a business partnership, it's friendship." Holmes smiled slightly. "Yes, my old friend, friendship." For a moment, they watched the river in silence. The sun danced on the water's surface. In the distance, Big Ben struck noon. Deep, echoing tones spread over the city. "Well," Watson finally said, "what shall we do now? Wait for a new case?" Holmes left the bridge. He began to walk, Watson beside him. "There will always be new cases, Watson. London has never been very good at keeping its secrets. Somewhere right now, someone is planning a crime. Someone is hiding a secret. Someone needs help, and we will find them." Watson smiled. As always. When they returned to Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson was waiting at the door. She held an envelope. "Mr. Holmes, this just arrived. They say it's urgent." Holmes took the envelope. He opened it and read the note inside. His eyebrows rose. His eyes sparkled. "Watson, it seems the wait won't be long." Watson recognized the expression on his friend's face. That familiar excitement, the thrill of a new puzzle. A new case. Holmes put the note in his pocket. He started climbing the stairs. "Perhaps I must learn the details first. But Watson," he stopped, turned, around. "Be ready in an hour. I think we're in for an interesting evening." Watson nodded. "I'm always ready, Holmes. Always." When they entered the sitting room, the fireplace was still burning. Warm flames cast a soothing light around the room. Holmes sat down in his usual chair. Watson sat down too, picked up a book, but they both knew this calm was temporary. A new adventure, a new mystery was waiting just beyond the door, and Sherlock Holmes, as always, was ready to solve it. Outside, London went about its daily life. People worked, children played, life flowed. The Thames, as it had for centuries, flowed silently, carrying all the city's secrets toward the sea. But at 221B Baker Street, two friends sat by the fireplace. One case had closed, another was about to begin, and the friendship between them was stronger than ever. This was Sherlock Holmes's story, but it was also Watson's story, the story of two men's battle against the darkness. And this battle would never end, because darkness always produced new secrets. And Holmes was always ready to shed light on those secrets. The fireplace crackled. The clock ticked, and over London the sun began to set slowly. But tomorrow would be a new day, and a new day meant a new adventure, as it always did.